Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 648. What are you looking at, Fishboy? Ethan noticed that the merfolk third princess didn't seem particularly surprised after he kicked the 12 guards. Instead, she simply observed the scene, a peculiar glint flickering in her eyes, as though she were watching an amusing performance. Don't try to guess what I'm thinking. These men truly are unbearable. The princess's voice suddenly resonated inside his mind. Got it. Ethan didn't bother replying telepathically. He just said the words aloud, cutting her thought short. His sudden verbal response startled everyone nearby. The next instant, the 12 guards, who had just been verbally accosted by Ethan, snapped out of their confusion and quickly straightened back into their bowing positions. Ethan's body flickered. In a blur, he darted past them like a flash of silver fish. Smack! 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 12 sharp slaps echoed in rapid succession, crisp as firecrackers in the water. Then, Ethan's figure shot backward just as swiftly. Smack! 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 Another 12 strikes landed, perfectly mirrored. Princess, you said you've been waiting for me. Shall we go? No one expected Ethan's return to be so sudden, or that he'd speak to the third princess so casually, as though he hadn't just humiliated her royal guards. The 12 merfolk who had been struck stood frozen, their faces swelling around the gills until they puffed up like bloated sea anemones. Ethan quietly shook his hand. The force behind the blows had made his palms sting. As expected, they were indeed half-step apex state powerhouses, hard enough to hurt his hand a little. Let's go, the princess said, her clear voice ringing through the water before the guards could react. She and Ethan, despite the difference in their size and form, floated forward together toward the distant structure. Then came Dragonchild. She moved after them, and as she passed the still-dazed guards, she slowed down. Tilting her head, she gave them a long, pitying look. The guards stared back, bewildered. Dragonchild sighed softly and continued after the princess. Next came Emery Shaw. He too paused when he reached them, tilted his head and sighed. Then he hurried to catch up with Dragonchild. Regis followed, repeating the same motion. By now, the guard's eyes were bloodshot. What did all those sighs even mean? The last to approach was Starfall. Unlike the others, he didn't just tilt his head, he turned his whole body to face them. What are you looking at? He asked flatly. The 12 merfolk, their faces dark with rage and humiliation, shouted back in unison. What are you looking at? They couldn't stand another moment of silent mockery. Starfall paused. His expression shifted. I'm looking at you, he said slowly. Looking at you. Looking right at you. What are you going to do about it? Starfall was Ethan's father, and it was safe to say his temper wasn't much different. When he'd first appeared in the Silverwood family's hidden territory, he had been every bit as arrogant as his son. So when faced with such a challenge, there was no way he'd back down. He stepped forward and raised his hand. In one smooth motion, his fist blurred 12 times. Each strike landed cleanly on the crown of a guard's head. Starfall was a genuine apex state powerhouse. Ah! The 12 guards clutched their heads and began hopping in pain, their movements stiff and ridiculous. Within seconds, 12 carrot-sized lumps swelled on their skulls. Since they were already short, the bumps made their heads look even larger and more comical. Hiccup. One of the guards suddenly hiccuped, his body convulsing before he collapsed face first onto the ground. The rest followed like dominoes, each one twitching, hiccuping, and then going limp. Huh? I didn't even hit them that hard? Starfall muttered, scratching his messy hair. With a shrug, he hurried after Ethan and the others. Ethan's group continued deeper into the heart of the city, unaware that not long after they left, the 12 motionless guards suddenly sprang back to life. Ah! I'm going home to tell my dad. Me too. I'm telling Grandpa. I'm telling my mom. In the next instant, 12 small figures shot out through the gates of the city of the Whale Fall like startled shrimp. Soon, Ethan spotted the colossal castle ahead. It towered so high it nearly brushed the glowing dome that sealed the underwater city. At its peak rested an enormous pearl, radiating a soft, silver light that filled the depths. A brilliant imitation of sunlight in the dark sea. The group reached the castle's entrance, which was unexpectedly small, barely the height of an ordinary human doorway. Given the princess's petite form, the size actually seemed generous for her. The entrance was heavily guarded by sentries carrying tridents similar to the ones Ethan had encountered before. The only difference was the white vertical mark running down the center of their foreheads. Upon the princess's arrival, the guards immediately bowed with reverence. They even nodded politely to Ethan and the other humans. Well, look at that, Ethan thought dryly. Give them a third eye, and they suddenly learn manners. Without any trouble, the princess led them inside. The interior of the castle was breathtaking. Ethan had never visited a royal palace before, but he had heard stories of golden halls and jeweled walls. None of those tales, however, could compare to this. Every surface glimmered with precious stones, each one glowing faintly in the filtered light. The floor shimmered like glass, and the pillars sparkled with embedded gems. Even the water itself seemed to carry the reflection of their shine. Ethan's eyes gleamed. He couldn't help thinking how easy it would be to pry a few of those gems loose. You better not try anything stupid. The princess's voice suddenly echoed in his mind. If the merfolk sovereign gets angry, even your father won't be able to save you. Wait here while I report to my father. Ethan frowned, his expression tightening. He expanded his soul power, forming a protective barrier around his consciousness. It's useless. Ugh! You pervert. The princess's voice rang again, clear but flustered. The moment the words left her mouth, her pale face flushed bright red. She cursed under her breath, her tiny form turning pink, and darted away as fast as she could. Ethan smirked. You think you can just peek into my mind? Try it again, and I'll show you something even spicier. He leaned back casually, still grinning as he watched her retreat. What's wrong with the third princess? Emery Shaw asked, genuinely puzzled. Nothing much, Ethan said lightly. She kept trying to read my mind, so I showed her an adult movie in there. Problem solved. What? Emery nearly jumped out of his skin. His eyes went wide, and for a moment, he couldn't decide whether to be horrified or impressed. This guy's insane, he thought. Ethan shrugged. What? She's invading my privacy. I'm just defending myself. That's the innate ability of merfolk females, Emery explained, rubbing his forehead. The purer their bloodline, the stronger their telepathic sense. They don't do it intentionally. Ethan blinked, then let out a quiet laugh. Well, now she'll think twice before doing it again. Chapter 649. The Sea King's Echo. After the merfolk third princess left, Ethan and his companions remained in the lavish palace, waiting. Time stretched on. No one came. The silence grew heavier with each passing moment, and Ethan, after pacing the marble floor several times, began to lose patience. What is the meaning of this? He was just about to walk toward the door the princess had used when a colossal wave of power surged through the entire hall. But every gem embedded in the walls flared to life, flooding the palace with dazzling light. The aura that filled the air was immense, vast and overwhelming, like the sea itself. Ethan froze. So did everyone else. This power felt neither human nor entirely alive, yet it pulsed with a force that made his skin crawl. A suffocating pressure descended, cold and immense, carrying with it the instinctive dread of death. Then, a brilliant blue light burst from Dragon Child. A translucent, serpentine dragon coiled around her, rising upward in a spiral. Waves of blue energy rippled outward from her body, colliding with merging into, the oppressive aura that filled the palace. The draconic phantom hung suspended behind her, shimmering faintly. Dragon Child looked stunned. It's the power of the ocean, she murmured. Swoosh! A golden light flashed, and dozens of figures materialized throughout the hall, merfolk, small and radiant, their bodies shimmering like sunlight on water. Ocean power? Ethan muttered under his breath. At the center of the group floated a fist-sized golden merfolk, surrounded by attendants. His bearing alone made his identity clear. This was the master of the palace. Why do you use the power of the ocean to pressure us? Ethan demanded, his voice low but edged. What is your intent? Before he could take another step, Dragon Child moved past him. Her voice rang out, steady and resonant, carrying a strange echo. The phantom behind her seemed to roar in unison, a dragon's cry woven into her words. If she hadn't spoken first, Ethan would have confronted them himself. The sudden outburst of energy had nearly triggered his quintessence bone. For an instant, a faint, multicolored light had flickered across his skin before Dragon Child's blue aura smothered it. He knew that ability never activated unless his life was truly in danger. The weight of that pressure had been real. It had felt like being dragged to the ocean floor, crushed under a depth that no human could survive. The merfolk stared, speechless. Panic flickered in their eyes as they looked from Dragon Child to the phantom looming behind her. The golden merfolk king hesitated, then finally spoke, his tone cautious and reverent. "Honored guest, why do you possess the power of the ocean and the Sea King's sole blessing?" He even inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that left both Ethan and Dragon Child momentarily stunned. "The Sea King's power?" Dragon Child repeated, frowning as she turned to glance at the phantom. "You mean this is the Sea King's sole blessing?" "Yes," the Merfolk King replied, his expression tightening. "You truly don't know that this is the Sea King's power?" Dragon Child let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Heh, this is my own power." Ethan's mind stirred. "So this is her moment to shine, huh?" "Impossible," the Merfolk King said sharply, his voice rising. "Even if the Sea King were to reincarnate, he could never become human." "A human? Who told you I was human?" Dragon Child shot back, her eyes narrowing. The golden Merfolk King stiffened. "If you are not human, that is even more impossible. On this earth, no magical beast can completely transform into a human form and shed all traces of its origin. Not even the revered Sea King himself." His tiny face was a mixture of disbelief and awe. Ethan recalled the WYRM tribe he had met before. They could assume human-like shapes, but never perfectly. There were always remnants of their true nature. A horn here, a patch of scales there. Even the self-proclaimed dragon of consumption, who appeared as a black-robed man, still bore 3 horns and streaks of scales across his face. Yet Dragon Child's transformation was flawless. She looked completely human, breathtakingly so. No wonder the merfolk hadn't recognized her for what she was. She hadn't shown her true form since arriving here. "Heh, then let me show you," Dragon Child said, a faint sneer curving her lips. Roar! A thunderous dragon's cry shook the palace. Her body rose into the air, spinning once as the phantom dragon behind her merged into her being. In the next instant, a vast, serpentine form filled the grand hall. A blue dragon 100 meters long, her scales gleaming like polished sapphires. "Little one." Her voice rumbled like the depths of the sea, each word vibrating through the floor. "Tell me, why did you use the power of the ocean to suppress us?" The sound wasn't merely heard, it was felt. The resonance of her voice alone created a hurricane that swept through the palace, sending waves rippling across the walls and knocking several merfolk off balance. This. The merfolk stared in utter shock. Even the third princess trembled, her expression frozen between awe and terror. "Sea King, have mercy." The merfolk king stammered, his tiny golden body bowing low. The rest of the merfolk immediately followed suit, falling to the ground in a collective act of reverence, foreheads pressed to the floor. Then, the great blue dragon shimmered and dissolved, collapsing into a stream of light that reformed into Dragon Child's human body. She landed lightly, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from her sleeve, and gave Ethan a mischievous wink. Ethan blinked, then smirked. "She's at it again." He gave her a subtle thumbs up. Dragon Child caught it and rolled her eyes, shooting him a playful glare that carried a flash of charm sharp enough to make Ethan's heart skip. He quickly looked away, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "All right, rise," Dragon Child said finally. Her voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. The merfolk obeyed instantly. Even the merfolk king looked deferential, his movements careful and restrained. "Now," Dragon Child continued, crossing her arms, "you still haven't answered my question. Why did you use the power of the ocean just now?" Ethan sighed inwardly. Once Dragon Child locked onto something, she wouldn't let it go until she got her answer. "Respected Sea King, please look at this," the merfolk king said humbly, gesturing toward something unseen. Ethan watched the exchange, curiosity flickering behind his eyes. The Sea King, the king of the sea, or perhaps the Dragon King of the Eastern Seas? Whatever the truth was, one thing was clear to him now. The Sea King and the power within Dragon Child were both tied, unmistakably, to dragons. Chapter 650. The Whale Falls Omen. If this had nothing to do with the Dragon Clan, the merfolk's sovereign wouldn't have bowed so deeply the moment the Dragon Child revealed her true form. Even so, the king of the merfolk still dropped to one knee in solemn reverence. This guy's clearly not just some random fish, Ethan thought, watching closely. As that thought passed through his mind, the Dragon Child reached out and accepted a piece of bone that shimmered with golden light. Ethan's eyes narrowed. It was enormous, smooth and pale like a shard of fish bone, though something about its shape reminded him disturbingly of a human shoulder blade. "Don't tell me this came from one of their own," he wondered, a chill running down his spine. The Dragon Child studied the surface of the bone, her expression shifting as her gaze followed the faint glow crawling across it. Suddenly, she snapped her head around and locked eyes with Ethan. Her face was a mix of disbelief and alarm. "What is it?" Ethan asked, taken aback by her reaction. "See for yourself," she said quickly, stepping closer. She held the bone shard out toward him. Ethan reached for it slowly. Regis and Starfall leaned in over his shoulders, their curiosity mirroring his. At first, Ethan's face was simply puzzled. But the longer he looked, the more his expression changed. Confusion gave way to shock, and then to something close to awe. Regis and Starfall were no different. Both men froze, staring as if they could hardly believe what they were seeing. Across the bone's surface, lines of text shimmered in gold. The writing wasn't etched or painted. It was as if the words were seeping out from within the bone itself, glowing softly beneath the surface. The message read, "City of the Whalefall, Day of Revival. The great calamity nears, the whale's eternal descent. Ethereal manifestation, the druid god's claim. He who is Ethan, fortune shall attend. Devour the tribulation, a new world's dawn. By the ocean's power, his true self is vetted. Should the five-colored divine light appear, lend him your full aid. Purge the unknown, eradicate the darkness. Restore the order, erase the wicked." The meaning was unmistakable. The prophecy, or whatever it was, pointed directly at Ethan. Where did you get this?" It wasn't Ethan who asked, but Starfall. His voice was tight, incredulous. To him, those words sounded like they were tying his son to some cataclysm waiting to unfold. That was not something any father wanted to hear. No matter how gifted or powerful Ethan might be, anything described as a great calamity could only mean danger, immense, world-shaking danger. Starfall's jaw tightened. He wasn't about to let his son walk blindly into that. "Honored guest," the Merfolk King said respectfully, lowering his head. "This was a gift from the Merfolk Sovereign 6 months ago, when the city of the Whale Fall reactivated and our people awoke from the ice." "The Merfolk Sovereign? Reactivated?" Ethan echoed, catching on to the keywords. "Yes," the king replied. "The city of the Whale Fall does not remain active at all times. Nor do we Merfolk dwell continually among the living. Our city only awakens when the world itself demands it." He spoke in great detail, his tone carrying the gravity of long-kept secrets. From his explanation, Ethan and the others began to understand the history of the city of the Whalefall, and the strange fate that bound the Merfolk to it. The city, it turned out, surfaced only during moments of great turmoil. Each reawakening heralded a crisis that would shake the world to its core. And when that tribulation passed, the vast crystal suspended above the city would lose its brilliance. Once the light faded completely, the city would sink beneath the waves once more, swallowed by the sea and sealed in eternal frost. The Merfolk would fall into deep slumber, preserved in ice until the next catastrophe summoned them again. This was their destiny, the endless cycle of awakening and silence that defined the fate of the Merfolk clan. According to the king, the last time the city of the Whalefall had stirred was during what humans knew as the Second World War. He expressed quiet astonishment that the city had already reactivated again, breaking its centuries-long dormancy. And when Ethan traced the timeline in his mind, realization struck him. The city's awakening had occurred at the exact moment of his own rebirth. The king went on to explain that every time the city of the Whalefall reawakened, the Merfolk Sovereign would grant a sacred bone shard. The entire Merfolk clan was bound to follow the message inscribed upon it. When Ethan asked who this mysterious sovereign actually was, the king only shook his head, again and again. He admitted that even though he himself had lived for countless millennia, he had never once laid eyes on the sovereign. He was only the second king of the Merfolk, ruler of the current era of the city of the Whalefall. And the first king, he said, had never seen the sovereign either. Still, he was certain that the sovereign's will lingered, that it continued to guide their clan from the depths of the sea, unseen yet ever-present. Ethan found it difficult to believe. Could the Merfolk truly be a race born to serve the needs of fate itself? Their reappearance in every age wasn't random. It was to face and resolve some coming catastrophe. History's great river flowed endlessly onward. Yet within its current, the Merfolk had always been there, hidden but vital. They never appeared in official records, but legends remembered them. The Western myth of the mermaid, for example, was nothing more than a romanticized echo of their true form. It was clear now they weren't some malevolent race. Everything they had done, from the moment they found him, had been for a reason. They had brought him here because this was the only place where the ocean's power could manifest. And it was here that his true self would be tested. A sudden, uneasy thought crossed Ethan's mind. Wait. What if I'm just some random guy who happens to share the name? Wouldn't that ocean's power just tear me apart? His brow twitched as he voiced the concern aloud. Before the Merfolk king could answer, Emery Shaw spoke instead, his tone calm and reassuring. Ethan, you don't need to worry about that. You're not the first person we've brought here, nor the first we've sent away. Anyone bearing the name Ethan who comes here, even if they aren't the one we seek, is never harmed. After the verification, if they're not the chosen one, they're given treasures instead. The only drawback is, their memories are wiped. Ethan blinked. Oh? So there have been other people named Ethan before me? Yes, Emery replied with a nod. But that stopped once the title Druid God began to spread through the world of ethereal. That's when our focus turned fully to you. The problem is, you've been as elusive as a ghost. He smiled faintly, almost relieved. That's why we had to bring Lila along this time. Hearing that, Ethan gave a dry laugh and exhaled through his nose. So that's what this is about. His tone softened, then sharpened again. Speaking of which, where is Lila now? He turned his gaze toward the Merfolk King. Well, The king froze, his expression tightening. His voice faltered. Humph. Speak. The dragon child snapped, sensing something was off. They were... The third princess began hesitantly. But before she could finish, a piercing sound cut through the palace. Ah! Squeak, squeak, squeak. It echoed through the halls, sharp and rhythmic. Ethan's eyes widened. He recognized it instantly. It was the merfolk's emergency signal. The same one he had heard before when danger approached. The noise silenced the princess mid-sentence. Around them, every merfolk turned pale. The water shimmered with panic. What's happening? Ethan demanded, his voice firm. Tell me where Lila and Astrid are now. I'm sorry, the third princess cried, her voice trembling. It's all my fault. I secretly let them go the day before yesterday. But they were captured by the Megalodon clan. Her voice broke as tears streamed down her cheeks. The drops crystallized midair, striking the marble floor in a soft clatter. Clink, clink, clink. Each tear became a tiny pearl. Ethan's face darkened. What? Megalodon? He muttered, disbelief hardening into anger. The signal outside blared louder, more urgent, more frantic. Ah! Squeak, squeak, squeak. The call of alarm filled the palace, echoing through the depths like a warning from the sea itself. Chapter 651. The Fortune Dragon's Awakening. The alarm blared, so loud it drowned out Ethan's own voice. Enough! He roared, fury breaking through his restraint. Dragon of consumption. Get out there and see what the hell is going on. His energy core pulsed, and a tiny, inch-long black W-arm appeared in his hand. Ethan caught it by the tail and hurled it outward. A low, eerie howl echoed through the chamber. The creature grew in an instant, twisting and expanding until it became a monstrous, catfish-like beast that blotted out the light. Can I eat them? The beast asked, its drooping mouth curling into something that might have been a grin. Eat every single trespasser, Ethan ordered, eyes flashing with cold malice. His senses had already swept across the area. The same gate they had entered through was now jammed with an army of sea creatures. It wasn't a random attack, this was a full-scale assault on the city of the Whalefall. Roger that. With a flick of its tail, the massive catfish vanished from sight. No, you mustn't. The Merfolk Sovereign's face twisted in horror. And why not? Ethan shot back, his gaze sharp and unyielding. The leader of that force is from the Megalodon clan, the Sovereign stammered. They are the acknowledged overlords of all sea tribes surrounding the city of the Whalefall. Miss Lila and Miss Astrid are in their custody, and the Merfolk are forbidden from attacking any of the sea tribes, even though those creatures outside are nothing but the refuse of various clans. His eyes darted toward the entrance as if he could sense the chaos outside. By then, the dragon of consumption had already begun its work. Its enormous body dwarfed even the largest blue whale. Without a word, it opened its gaping maw and inhaled. In an instant, the countless creatures outside were swallowed whole. Ha ha ha! It's been too long since I've had such a feast. Hick! With a single gulp, the battlefield was silent. The sea outside the city gates was empty. The battle had ended before the Sovereign could even finish speaking. My apologies, you spoke too slowly, Ethan said flatly. He turned and started toward the exit. Third Princess, please lead the way. Where is the Megalodon clan located? He threw the words over his shoulder, already walking. Noble guest, please wait. The third princess said nothing, but the Sovereign quickly called out again. Spit it out, I'm busy. Ethan snapped. His patience had run dry. Whether this was a king or not didn't matter. Every wasted second put Lila and Astrid in greater danger. Was that the dragon of consumption? The Sovereign asked cautiously. What if it was? What if it wasn't? Ethan's tone was cold. Then, do you also possess the fortune dragon? You mean this little mud skipper? Ethan's energy core flashed, and a tiny golden dragon shimmered into existence. He caught it by the tail, letting it dangle in the light. Oh, it truly is the fortune dragon. A wet, slapping sound echoed through the hall. In the next instant, dozens of merfolk, including the sovereign himself, collapsed onto the floor. They dropped into full prostration, lying flat like motionless fish, performing some sort of salute. The gesture was even more reverent than the one they had offered the dragon child. Ethan stared, momentarily taken aback. So was the dragon child. Her eyes lingered on the tiny dragon in Ethan's hand, her expression conflicted. When the dragon of consumption had appeared earlier, she had sensed a strange, overwhelming presence. But it had all happened too quickly for her to see clearly, and the merfolk sovereign had sensed no more than she had. "And noble guest," the sovereign stammered, still pressed to the floor. Would you please release the fortune dragon? Please." In his shock, Ethan finally realized what was happening. Was this little mudskipper really that important? He should have brought him out sooner. Why? If he runs off, are you the one who's going to stop him? Ethan didn't ease up. He swung the tiny golden dragon by its tail a few more times, as if testing its weight. "Yeah." The little creature squealed in protest, its voice sharp and oddly pitiful. Ethan frowned, remembering what happened last time, back under Bottle Isle, when the little golden dragon had bolted the instant it was released. It had vanished before he could even blink. Who knew if it would take off again? He still didn't have any contract with the thing. He couldn't summon it at will either. He could only force it out of his energy core like squeezing toothpaste from a tube. Ethan. Before he could finish his thought, or the merfolk sovereign could speak, the dragon child suddenly shrieked. "Huh!" Ethan froze in surprise. "Let him go!" She darted forward, faster than his eyes could follow, and in the next instant she was right in front of him. Crunch. She sank her teeth into his arm. Ouch! Holy hell! That hurts! Ethan instantly let go, and the little golden dragon bolted, zipping out of sight. The dragon child released his arm only after the creature was free. Ethan looked down. 2 neat rows of teeth marks dug into his skin, already beating with blood. She really went for the kill. "You!" He glared at her, half angry, half stunned. "Humph!" The dragon child crossed her arms and stepped back, positioning herself protectively in front of the little golden dragon. Seeing her stance, Ethan's irritation faded almost immediately. He sighed. "A gentleman doesn't fight with a lady," he muttered under his breath. The merfolk sovereign suddenly spoke, his voice trembling as he began to recite something half in awe, half in disbelief. "He who is Ethan, fortune shall attend. Devour the tribulation, a new world's dawn. By the ocean's power, his true self is vetted. Should the 5-colored divine light appear, lend him your full aid." He fell silent for a moment, then gasped. "Fortune, tribulation. That means both avatars of the ancestral dragon have now manifested." The chamber went deathly still. The sovereign hesitated before speaking again, voice low and cautious. Noble guest, would it be possible to—" But his timing couldn't have been worse. Ethan was still irritated from being bitten, his patience hanging by a thread. "No, it would not," he cut in sharply. "And if you try using that ocean's power on me again, I will tear this palace apart. Understand? I've got more important things to deal with. Third princess, show me the way. Now." "Thank you." He didn't need to hear the rest to know what the sovereign wanted, to use the ocean's power to verify his identity once again. But Ethan had no interest in going through that agony a second time. That brief contact earlier had been enough to make him feel like he'd brushed against death itself. The merfolk sovereign faltered, lost for words. He already knew Ethan's identity, the man foretold by the merfolk's own sacred bone. But his nature, and that of his people, was bound by old laws and unyielding tradition. He wanted to complete the verification ritual, even if he no longer needed to. At Ethan's command, the third princess glanced toward her father. "Father?" she asked softly, waiting for his decision. The sovereign's gaze flickered uncertainly. His hesitation lasted only a moment before his expression hardened. "Issue the order," he said. "The inner city guard is to immediately purge all merfolk with Megalodon bloodlines. The outer city forces are to mobilize at once. Surround and suppress the Megalodon clan." Chapter 652. The Tide That Hungers. The king's sudden decree stunned every merfolk in the hall. One male merfolk, roughly the same height as the third princess, stepped forward, his face marked with disbelief. "Father, you can't. Our ancestral law forbids us from using any force against the sea creatures." "Silence! Do you dare defy the merfolk sovereign's sacred mandate?" The king snapped, his voice cutting through the chamber. "But—" The young man's protest died in his throat. "Don't play games with me," the king said sharply. "I used that exact trick 10,000 years ago. I'm still alive, so don't you dare try it. In a blur, his small figure flashed forward. The king appeared directly before the male merfolk, his entire frame barely the size of the younger man's head. Do you know why you are the only male among my children? His voice softened, though it carried a sting. I didn't want you to repeat my path. Yet you've disappointed me. He gave a cold snort. It's not just the Megalodon clan. There are 11 other sea tribes. If the sovereign's chosen one commands it, wiping them all out is simply fulfilling the divine will. Without another word, the king turned and drifted out of the palace, his golden aura fading into the deep blue light. Ethan stood frozen, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. What in the world? Did I just walk into a royal family drama? Still, something about the king's behavior struck him. The sudden shift in tone, the way he invoked the sacred mandate, it all pointed to one thing. The king had accepted his identity. If not, he would never have spoken those words before his own court. Everyone in the palace followed after the king, their movements synchronized and solemn. Only the stunned male merfolk remained behind, still processing the outburst. The third princess floated closer to Ethan, her voice dropping to a whisper. Don't read too much into it. My father's been looking for an excuse to get rid of those meddling tribes for ages. The ancestral law just wouldn't let him. Now he finally found a loophole. She didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan understood perfectly. The 10,000-year-old monarch was using him as a pretext. Still, Ethan didn't care. The Megalodon clan had to be dealt with one way or another. If he had it his way, he would have preferred to simply storm in and end it quickly. This business of mobilizing troops, assigning ranks, and organizing sieges was far too tedious for his taste. While the merfolk prepared for war, deep in the ocean far from the city of the Whalefall, a vast tide of sea creatures gathered in the dark. The water churned as if stirred by an ancient hunger. Father, I've done it this time. I finally gave you the perfect excuse to attack the city of the Whalefall. A small merfolk, barely a meter tall, grinned with pride. If Ethan had been there, he would have recognized him as one of the dozen merfolk he had slapped across the face upon entering the city. Beside the little merfolk loomed a monstrous figure. The lower half was fish, the upper half human, but its head belonged to a massive megalodon shark. Well done, well done. But what about this human you mentioned? The shark-headed monster rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. It's the one I heard about from that fool of a prince, the one mentioned in the merfolk sacred bone. But they've brought in several humans recently, and none turned out to be the real deal. This one's probably the same. He paused, his expression shifting to a sly grin. Oh, and father, those two women I picked out for you a few days ago. Have you, tasted them yet? The monster's great tail flicked lazily through the water. Tasted? Not yet, you little wretch. I haven't fully mastered my human transformation. But soon, very soon. His deep laugh rolled like thunder through the depths. The flick of his tail made his meaning clear. His lower half was still far from human. There were limitations he had yet to overcome. Congratulations, father. Another step closer to ascension. The day our Megalodon clan unites the sea tribes is almost here. The smaller merfolk straightened, suddenly solemn, and bowed deeply. The shark-headed monster led a massive host of his kin through the dark waters toward the city of the Whalefall. As they advanced, more tribes joined them, squid, crabs, rays, and creatures far older than any legend. Each tribe's leader took their place at the front, laughing and boasting as the army swelled into a living tide. Report! Urgent news! A tiny shrimp darted forward from the distance, trembling so hard his shell clicked audibly. What's got you flailing like that? One of the generals barked. It's terrible. Our vanguard. Completely devoured. The shrimp stammered, voice shaking. Devoured? The tribal leaders exchanged confused looks. What do you mean, devoured? The shrimp's antennae quivered as he spoke. A monstrous fish burst out from the city of the Whalefall. It swallowed our entire vanguard in one bite. I think I was too small for it to notice, so I hid behind a rock. Once it went back into the city, I ran. At less than a meter tall, the shrimp was indeed tiny among giants. What? The gathered leaders roared in outrage. The shark-headed monster's muscles bulged, his gills flaring wide. Speed up, he bellowed. The merfolk are keeping a monster fish? Have they forgotten their ancestral law? How dare they defy the balance of the sea? For ages, the merfolk had only appeared at certain times, leaving the deep ocean to the other tribes. Each revival of the merfolk was treated as a harvest season by the others. Their women, beautiful beyond comparison, were a coveted prize. Even more, merfolk women could mate with any species and bear children. Each time the merfolk revived, they forged marriage alliances with the larger sea tribes. The children born of those unions were later brought to the city of the Whalefall, ranked by the purity of their bloodline, and assigned to guard the city. The women who married out were also required to return before the city sealed itself again. No one forced them to come back, but when the great merfolk pearl above the city went dark, any who remained outside would turn to stone, never to awaken again. Only those within the city would be resurrected when it next awoke. Even so, many chose to stay with their lovers, knowing full well their fate. Most of those lovers, of course, saw them as trophies rather than partners. Over time, the sea tribes had come to see the merfolk as weak and easy prey. In truth, the merfolk had little choice. Their numbers were few, and women vastly outnumbered men. They practiced strict monogamy, and once a merfolk fell in love, that bond lasted a lifetime. It was their way of preserving the fragile balance within the city of the Whalefall. Merfolk men, however, were bound by even harsher rules. They could only take pure-blooded merfolk wives. Anyone who broke that law was banished forever, left to perish when the Great Pearl's light went out. Now, the 12 tribes surrounding the city of the Whalefall had gathered into one massive army, their forces swelling like a storm front across the seafloor. Inside the city, a different kind of storm was brewing. The merfolk were mobilizing, their soldiers taking up ancient weapons that hadn't seen the light of day in 10,000 years. It was the first time in an age that the merfolk had assembled such power. Ethan watched from the high balcony of the Coral Palace, the glow of the Great Pearl reflected in his eyes. The sight before him was breathtaking. Countless warriors moving in perfect rhythm, shimmering tails flashing in the water like waves of light. Chapter 653. The Sacred Emissary Who Refused the Title. Ethan had also realized that the merfolk weren't a species limited to those strange squeaking sounds. In fact, the voices of the pure-blooded merfolk were remarkably melodic, soft, flowing tones that seemed to ripple through the water like music. He noticed something else as well. All the soldiers in the merfolk army were female, while the guards stationed around the palace were male. It was clearly a society where men tended to the home and women commanded the world beyond it. The 4 merfolk they had first encountered, and the countless others who had surrounded them upon entering the city, were a different case entirely. Those ones communicated only with those squeaking noises. The 3rd princess had served as their interpreter, explaining that those merfolk were of mixed blood, the battle thralls, the result of generations of intermarriage between the merfolk and other sea tribes. Ethan listened and nodded, beginning to understand. So, he thought, these are the dull offspring of crossbreeding between species. Even so, he couldn't help but admit that merfolk genes were incredibly dominant. Any female merfolk, no matter what creature she mated with, would always give birth to a child that looked unmistakably merfolk. Humans were the sole exception, the 3rd princess had added. By that logic, Ethan mused, the human gene must be the most powerful of all. Squeak squeak. Report. The 12-tribe coalition is now 20 miles from the city. As the merfolk army gathered, a scout rushed in with the news. Ethan's senses were heavily suppressed underwater. Inside the city of the Whalefall, he could still perceive things clearly enough, but out in open waters, his awareness was sharply limited. He hadn't even detected the enemy 20 miles away. Still, earlier scouts had warned them that the 12 sea tribes were advancing toward the city. They were demanding that the merfolk hand over the few humans who had recently arrived, the same ones the dragon of consumption had devoured the vanguard of, or else they would flatten the city of the Whalefall. Ethan understood immediately that this was still about him. When he asked, the 3rd princess explained that the real cause lay with the merfolk he had disciplined earlier. The mothers of those 12 youths were women from a collateral branch of the royal family who had married the leaders of the 12 sea tribes. Because they carried traces of the royal bloodline, they had been granted positions of honor, elite royal guards, after proving their strength upon entering the city. There were 32 elite royal guards in total, and those 12 were among them. But because their fathers were the sea tribe leaders, they had grown arrogant within the city walls. They behaved properly only before the true royal family, and bullied nearly every other merfolk beneath them. Such spoiled brats. I should have crushed them when I had the chance. Ethan said flatly, his tone calm, as if he were discussing the swatting of an insect. The 3rd princess's eyes flickered. She could feel the cold, genuine intent behind his words. It wasn't a bluff. His heartbeat hadn't even changed. He spoke with such chilling normalcy that a faint tremor passed through her. At that moment, she knew the 12 sea tribes were doomed. Given the decree carved into the sacred bone by the merfolk sovereign, if Ethan were to order the extermination of those tribes now, her father would send the troops without hesitation. The thought of such a war darkened her expression. The sea tribes were powerful, and an all-out conflict would bring devastating losses to the merfolk. The idea of her people dying like that filled her with real sorrow. By the way, Ethan said, turning his gaze back to her. You mentioned that you let Lila and Astrid go, which is how they were captured. Why did you let them go in the first place? The 3rd princess hesitated before answering. My brother told me that even if it was the will of the merfolk sovereign, it was still wrong to bring people here by force. I thought about it and he was right. When I saw those two women, even though they were free to move about and not truly imprisoned, she didn't finish her sentence. But Ethan understood perfectly. Every day, those two women would gaze upward, toward the shimmering surface of the sea. I never spoke to them, the third princess continued softly. But I could tell, they were longing for something. I can't say I understand a woman's heart, but seeing them like that made me feel uneasy. So one day I took a chance. Behind father's back, I asked the old sea turtle to take them away in secret. Her voice faltered, but the old sea turtle never returned. When I went to look for him, I found only his shell. He'd been killed by the Megalodon clan. She said it with complete openness, tilting her head slightly, her expression as innocent as ever. Your brother told you all this? Ethan asked, frowning. Yes, my brother is wonderful. He cares for our people as though they were his own children, and he's always been kind to my second sister and me. I don't know why, but father seems to dislike him very much. The confusion in her eyes seemed genuine. Ethan watched her carefully, his instincts sharpening. The golden-haired merfolk prince she spoke of sounded like a manipulative schemer. He had a feeling that whatever had happened to Lila was tied directly to that prince. The third princess had likely been nothing more than a pawn. If that was the case, Ethan thought dryly, he wouldn't mind helping the merfolk king re-roll for a better heir. A deep voice suddenly rolled through the waters, shaking the city itself. Move out! The command echoed from every coral wall and shell-covered archway of the city of the Whale Fall. The merfolk king's body might have been small, but his voice carried the weight of an entire ocean. In an instant, Ethan saw the city transform. The army was fully assembled. An entire host of merfolk warriors clad in armor, each holding a trident that glimmered faintly in the deep blue light. The artisans and laborers who had filled the streets moments ago were gone, replaced by soldiers ready for war. Even the wide plazas felt strangely hollow now, emptied of life except for the tide of armored figures. Massive sea turtles and other colossal creatures floated among them, carrying strange, shell-shaped siege weapons, giant conches engraved with glowing runes. Ethan blinked, trying not to smirk. He could only hope those conches weren't meant to serenade the enemy to death. Sacred emissary, shall we proceed together? The merfolk king drifted toward him, bypassing the front lines with a calm, almost playful air. Ethan froze. Sacred emissary? His face darkened immediately. Your Majesty, please just call me by my name. Don't call me that. He grimaced. It sounds awful. The third princess tried and failed to suppress a laugh, covering her mouth as her eyes sparkled. Ethan shot her a look that said, I know you heard that in my head. Ha ha. The king's laughter rippled through the water. Then how about a more human title? I shall call you my great nephew. How does that sound? For a moment, the entire court fell silent. The third princess blinked in shock. Ethan's expression twisted slightly. This old man, is he seriously trying to claim seniority? Technically, given the king's ancient age, it wasn't unreasonable. But the sly glint in his eye made Ethan certain the old fish was doing it on purpose. Seeing Ethan's silence, the king simply laughed again. He extended a tiny, clawed hand, barely larger than a bird's foot, and caught hold of Ethan's sleeve. Come then, great nephew. Let's go watch the battle. Ah, and this is my third daughter, Star. You two should spend more time together. Before Ethan could react, the king grabbed Star with his other hand. In the next instant, an immense power surged from the old man's palm, a force completely at odds with his small, fragile-looking body. Ethan barely had time to resist before he was pulled forward through the water, dragged helplessly along by a creature the size of a coconut. Chapter 654. Veils at the Gate. The merfolk army marched in tight formation, their ranks moving steadily toward the great gate of the city of the Whale Fall. The gate itself was colossal, wide enough for the entire army to pass through at once, its surface glimmering faintly under the dim blue light of the deep. Wait a moment! Just as Ethan and the king were about to step through the entrance, the merfolk king suddenly stopped. Ethan hesitated, unsure why, until the king turned toward the third princess. Star. Star, he said, his tone deliberate. Do you still have the merfolk veil you conceived? The princess froze for a heartbeat, instantly understanding his meaning. She raised her hand, and three small white, flame-like wisps drifted into view above her palm, their light flickering softly in the water. Father, I've only managed to create 3 merfolk veils over the years, she said, her voice tinged with embarrassment. 3. The king's face brightened with delight. Haha. Excellent, excellent. Star's lips pressed together, displeased by how easily he was satisfied, but she said nothing. Great nephew, the king continued warmly, turning back to Ethan. These 3 merfolk veils will serve you for now. They'll completely nullify the drag of seawater and allow you to breathe as you would on land. As he spoke, Star stepped forward, offering the faintly glowing flames to Ethan, Regis, and Starfall. Ethan studied the delicate wisp in his hand, curiosity flickering in his eyes. It's so small, he murmured. How are we supposed to wear this? Just place it on your glabella? Star said quietly, her voice soft and a faint blush touching her cheeks. Ethan barely noticed her reaction. Eager to try, he pressed the tiny flame between his brows. A cool sensation rushed through him, spreading from his forehead to the tips of his fingers. He looked down and found his body wrapped in a thin, translucent film, like a veil of light. When he touched his face, he felt a smooth, jellyfish-like membrane forming a tight hood around his head. It clung to his skin but didn't restrict his movement in the slightest. Before, to move freely in the depths of the city of the Whalefall, Ethan had to activate his seal form. But now, with the merfolk veil in place, the heavy resistance of the water seemed to vanish entirely. Amazed, he dispelled his transformation to test it. Sure enough, even without his powers, he could move as effortlessly as if he were walking on solid ground. A grin spread across his face. Ha ha ha! His laughter bubbled through the water as his body shot forward, slipping through the barrier of the main gate. Regis and Starfall exchanged a look of disbelief before hurriedly placing their veils on and following after him. The dragon child, who needed no such aid, glided behind them effortlessly. The merfolk sovereign lingered a moment longer, watching them go. Behind him, the merfolk prince stood still, his face darkening as his gaze followed Ethan's figure. He clearly didn't like what he saw. The king, however, remained calm. His expression didn't change as he called out, "Great nephew, don't rush ahead. Those on the other side aren't easy prey." With that, he too swept through the shimmering water barrier. By the time Ethan and his companions reached the front of the merfolk army, the ocean around them had grown oppressively dark. He could sense the enemy somewhere in the distance, though his senses were limited here. The deep-sea gloom swallowed all light, leaving him unable to see even a shadow ahead. On land, 20 miles would have been enough to make out the opposing army. Down here, however, it was as if the darkness itself were alive, hiding everything that waited beyond. Suddenly, a shout cut through the water. "Report! The 12-tribe sea army has halted 5 kilometers out and is forming a battle array," a merfolk scout announced as he swam back up to the king, who had just reached Ethan. The king waved his hand and the merfolk ranks came to an immediate halt. They were now about 1,000 meters beyond the city's main gate, waiting in patient silence. Joran, form the array," he ordered. "Yes, sir," came 2 voices at once, a man's and a woman's. Ethan recognized them as General Joran and General Joran, siblings whose faces lit with eagerness at the command. War was something they had only ever practiced in name. Now they finally had a chance to show what they could do. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He had not expected the enemy to move so fast. 5 kilometers in the deep sea was both close and dangerously invisible. Light did not travel far down here, and sight was a poor ally. "Light the way," General Joran called sharply. At her command, the formation shifted. The difference between a land formation and a deep-sea formation hit Ethan at once. On land, armies stacked across 2 dimensions. Here, the merfolk built 3-dimensional cubes of soldiers, ranks rising and falling like living architecture. Slowly, giant turtles in the formation swam to higher positions. The clams on their backs began to open with a faint mechanical creak. A brilliant flare bloomed, and beams of light shot from the city of the whale fall to the gaping shells. The clams reflected and scattered the light until the dark ahead turned as bright as noon. For the first time since they left the gate, Ethan could see clearly. The 12-tribe coalition hovered 5 kilometers away. The sight was a chaotic array of shapes. Shrimps as soldiers, hulking crabs, sleek sharks, long-nosed marlins, and countless other creatures Ethan could not name. The sudden light threw them into confusion. The bright search beams were little more than blunt instruments in the pitch-black ocean, but in that darkness they were overwhelming, almost painful. General Joran swam forward to the front of his array and spoke loudly enough for the enemy to hear. "You 12 sea tribes, why do you press your army against the city of the Whale Fall?" A figure rose from the center of the opposing line, a merfolk about a meter tall who carried himself with an irritating arrogance. Well, he called, voice dripping with mockery. "If it isn't General Joran, the most idle officer in the whole city of the Whale Fall. What is this? A field exercise?" Sogar, smug and small in the water. He was one of the 32 elite guards and technically a subordinate of Joran, but he had a record of insolence that went back years. Joran's face tightened. "Sogar, you are a merfolk. Are you defecting by standing with the enemy?" he demanded, fury sharpening his tone. Sogar only sneered in reply. Oh, you remember my name, Jorand? Then remember this. I am the prince of the Megalodon clan. Why shouldn't I be here? And who here is not of higher standing than a mere general like you? The brat lectured as if he owned the sea. Jorand, a man of fewer words and more temper, had no ready comeback. For a beat he was simply speechless, which felt like an insult to anyone who had watched him command. Starfall muttered under her breath, the words carrying to Ethan even so. Damn it. I should have smashed his head in earlier. Ethan kept his mouth shut. Now was not the time to lower himself by answering some petty taunt. He watched the exchange and found his mind wandering, thinking of easier solutions. If only Blackie were here, he thought with a half-smile. That rascal would have talked trash until Sogar shrank 3 sizes. Or maybe Fatso, who had a way of turning a fight into a comedy act. Chapter 655. Clash Beneath the Waves. Good, good, good. General Jorand repeated the word 3 times, his face darkening with fury. It sounded less like praise and more like a prelude to violence. Before he could open his mouth, Jorand barked. Since you're here, then let's fight. Throwers, prepare. Ethan froze. Wait, are we really starting a war right now? Hold on, he shouted quickly. Lila and Astrid were still in their hands. Jorand clearly wasn't the type to talk things out. If he couldn't win an argument, he'd rather settle it with fists. Ethan's shout immediately drew the attention of the entire opposing force. Father, that's the one who hit me. The cry came from multiple directions at once. Some yelling for their mother, others for their uncle or grandfather. Each voice belonged to one of the Sea Tribe's younger warriors. Ethan felt a headache coming on. Perfect. I beat up their kids, and now they've gone and fetched their parents. Human, you? Execute yourself. A hoarse voice boomed from the crowd. An ancient creature stepped forward, its hunched back covered by a massive turtle shell. Ethan blinked, momentarily speechless. It's over. The dragon child groaned, covering her face. Yeah, Ethan thought grimly. Sure enough. Then he exploded. Execute myself? I'll execute your tribe. You crusty old turtle. Have you lived so long your brain's gone soft? You want me to off himself? Maybe I should pry that shell off your back and sell it to a fortune teller. They can rattle it around to tell people's futures. As he spoke, the merfolk veil around him rippled like a living thing. Ethan surged forward, landing squarely in the middle of the battlefield, barely 1,000 meters from the enemy line. Great nephew, don't. The merfolk king's face went pale. The warning came too late. A flash of silver caught Ethan's eye. A chill shot up from his tailbone to the base of his skull, every nerve screaming danger. His senses barely reached 500 meters, far too short to react in time. The merfolk sovereign darted forward, his tiny frame surprisingly fast. The dragon child, Regis, and Starfall all moved as well, but they were an instant too slow. Hum. Clang. In that instant, a 5-colored divine light flared from Ethan's body. A deep hum vibrated through the water, followed by the sharp ring of metal striking metal. Ethan caught sight of his attacker, a marlin no longer than 2 feet, its spear-like bill pressed against his chest. The sheer force behind that strike made his blood run cold. You son of a sea witch! Ethan roared, his fury boiling over. The marlin's eyes widened in disbelief. Just as Ethan drew back a fist, it flicked its tail and vanished in a silver blur, retreating faster than it had attacked. Within a heartbeat, it was 500 meters away again. Ethan's punch slammed into empty water. The 5-colored divine light. It really is the 5-colored divine light, the merfolk king exclaimed, his face shining with excitement. Ha! Great nephew. You are truly the sacred emissary. The entire exchange had lasted no more than a heartbeat. The sovereign finally reached Ethan's side, still trembling with excitement. Ethan rolled his eyes. He still hung up on the whole verification thing. Unreal. Ethan, are you all right? Starfall swam up beside him, scanning him from head to toe. I'm fine, Ethan said, though his heart was still pounding. He glanced down at his chest. The quintessence bone beneath his skin had automatically activated, shielding him, but it hadn't completely absorbed the impact. If not for the merfolk veil, that strike might have seriously hurt him. He exhaled slowly, still stunned. This thin, shimmering veil didn't just let him breathe and move underwater. It could defend him too, and with surprising strength. Merfolk King, hand over the human, and we can once again shake hands and make peace. The enemy held their ground. The silver marlin had already returned to the side of the Megalodon King, its glinting body hovering protectively near its master. The shark-headed monarch's eyes narrowed, voice rumbling low as he spoke. Before the Merfolk King could respond, Ethan stepped in. Peace, my ass. What do you think I am? A piece of cargo. You think I won't turn all of you into fish cans? Merfolk King. The Megalodon King snapped, ignoring Ethan's outburst. What is the meaning of this? The Merfolk King blinked, then casually lifted a hand shaped like a wrinkled chicken claw and scratched his ear. Great nephew, did you just hear a fish fart? Ethan's lips twitched. Who knows? Could have been a burp, or maybe he's grinding his teeth. The corner of his mouth quirked upward despite the tension. This old sovereign was nothing like the dignified, holier-than-thou emperors of the human world. The Merfolk sovereign suddenly brightened. Great nephew, this fish can you mentioned. Is it a delicacy? Huh. Ethan blinked. He hesitated, then explained. It's a way to preserve food. You put cooked fish in a sealed metal container. It keeps for a long time. And yeah, it tastes pretty good. The sovereign's eyes lit up. Fascinating. Do you know how to make it? Ethan trailed off. Seriously? He's asking this now. The shark-headed king, however, had reached the end of his patience. Enough! He roared, his voice booming through the water. He felt utterly humiliated. Over 100,000 warriors from 12 sea tribes stood assembled for battle, and their enemies were standing there discussing. Can fish. He didn't know what a fish can was, but the way they said it made his scales prickle. Whatever it was, it couldn't be good. The other tribe leaders began to rumble in outrage, their gills flaring, their fins thrashing in the water. Shut up! The Merfolk King's roar hit like an explosion. Boom! Ethan flinched, the shock rattling his skull as the water around him rippled violently. A thunderous pulse of sound rolled out from the Merfolk King, sweeping across the battlefield in a massive wave of pressure. Boom! Bang! The seawater churned into chaos. Ethan's eyes widened as the shockwave turned visible, rippling outward like a living wall and crashing into the enemy ranks. Did the Merfolk King just roar them into next week? The opposing tribes reeled. The old turtle from before grew rapidly, its shell expanding as it shielded its children behind it. The Megalodon King narrowed his beady eyes. Without growing an inch, he opened his mouth and unleashed a roar of his own. The resulting wave of sound slammed into the king's, meeting it in a blinding surge of energy. The seabed exploded into motion. Mud and sand shot upward, spinning into a storm of silt that blotted out the water around them. Ethan and the others started to fall back when a clear, gentle voice cut through the chaos. Cleanse. They turned. At some point, the third princess star had appeared behind them. Her tone was calm, but her words shimmered with power. A soft wave of energy spread outward. It wasn't like any magic Ethan had seen before. Not from games, not from the Umbral Star, not from anyone. Yet the result was immediate. The swirling mud and sand stilled, drawn downward as though pressed by an unseen hand. Within seconds, the water cleared. The battlefield beneath the waves came back into sharp focus, bright and still, yet charged with a silence that could shatter at any moment. Chapter 656. A World Without Water. Ethan had not expected the Merfolk King to attack so suddenly. All it took was a question about canned fish and a little too much talk from the wrong man, and the king's temper snapped like a line under a weight it could not bear. The king's power was not ordinary, and the Megalodon clan king across from him was no weakling either. Starfall and Regis stood frozen, both having felt that momentary surge from the Merfolk King, a surge that far outstripped their own strength. They had come with Ethan ready to use their apex state to smash any resistance and bring Lila back, and for the first time since they arrived, they were relieved no full clash had broken out. Had a fight begun, they might not have lasted. My great nephew, the Merfolk King said, his voice cold as it cut across the gathered ranks of 100,000 Sea Clan warriors. For this canned fish, do you prefer live fish or dead? His calm stare and that single question left Ethan bewildered. The king's obsession with canned fish was baffling. Live ones taste better, Ethan said after a moment's thought. Good. My great nephew, when you return, you must absolutely bring me the method for making canned fish. The king's tone softened, then grew grave. Do you know why we are held captive by the 12 Sea Clans? It is because of food shortages. They supply what we eat, but they bring us rotten fish and spoiled shrimp, always in pitiful amounts. We are always hungry. If we could learn canning, we could fish for ourselves, store food in bulk, and no longer be subject to them. My people would not have to marry into their clans to survive. Ethan listened, surprised by how serious the king sounded. Why can't you fish for yourselves now? He asked. The risk of going out is too great. Bringing back a small catch is not worth it, and a large haul will spoil, the king said, shaking his head. What risk? Ethan asked, catching the important detail. We merfolk are valuable from head to tail, the king said, his expression odd as he hesitated for a moment. Ethan remembered the old legends, the whispered stories about merfolk oil burning in the eternal lamps of ancient tombs, pearls falling like tears when a princess wept. In the human world, any of those treasures would buy fortunes. The Megalodon clan king barked a laugh at the king's words, the sound arrogant and loud. Merfolk king, are you delusional enough to think you can join with a few humans and wipe out my 12 sea clans? You must be dreaming. You are strong, but you are only one merfolk. Other clan leaders began to laugh with him, but the merfolk king, unperturbed, returned their ridicule with a cold, chilling laugh of his own. I have been preparing for 10,000 years. The only thing that held me back was an ancestral decree. I planned to use my death as the sacrifice to wipe out your entire race before I returned to the sea's embrace. Now my great-nephew has come, and that plan can be moved forward. Ethan felt, by all reason, that he should be angry. The king was using him as a tool, and he could hear that in the words. Still, something about the king's bluntness disarmed him. There was an odd, almost human simplicity to it that made him smile despite himself. Oh? Such ambition? The Megalodon king said, his posture changing as his laughter faded. No wonder the divine sea warned us to be careful about this merfolk resurgence. The divine sea, the merfolk king said, his face hardening. Humph, so you are connected to them. I suspected as much. When my father returned to the sea 10,000 years ago, he should never have broken your seals. Now I really cannot let you live. Hearing the words divine sea, the merfolk king's eyes narrowed even further, sharp as a blade gliding across old wounds. My great-nephew, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. I ask that you and your companions hold the line for this king. Ethan had been about to ask what exactly the divine sea represented. Another great power beneath the waves perhaps. But the king spoke first, and the urgency in his tone left no room for idle questions. War had arrived. Whatever trump card the king had prepared across 10 long millennia, Ethan could feel it in his bones. This would not be clean. It would be costly, and victory might come laced with ruin. These 12 sea clans had once been subordinates of the merfolk. 10,000 years ago, just before the first merfolk king perished, he had lifted the seals restraining them, and that single act had brought about the troubled underwater world Ethan was now standing in. Your Majesty? Ethan said, not stepping back, his voice calm and almost light. Wouldn't it be easier to reseal them, and force them to collect food without complaint? His gaze swept over the distant hosts of crab soldiers and shrimp soldiers thundering through the currents like an army of armored nightmares. Down here, everything was stronger. In the human world, an expert like Matriarch Whitmore was revered as nearly invincible, but here in the deep sea, her strength was barely above the foot soldiers. The merfolk king shook his head, sorrow flickering briefly in his eyes. My great-nephew, you do not understand. Though I have prepared for a long time, my strength now is nothing compared to the merfolk in their prime. To resubdue the 12 sea clans is impossible. But to wipe them out. He drew in a slow breath, voice steady. I can do that. Then if I asked you to simply control them, Ethan replied, his smile widening as if he were discussing something casual over tea. Could you do it? The king froze. Slowly, his eyes brightened, realization dawning. My great-nephew, are you? Ha 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 now. Ethan cut him off with a shout that cracked like thunder. Water vacuum. The moment the words left his lips, a deep, resonant vibration rolled above their heads, like distant drums pounding through the ocean floor. The seawater around them rippled violently as a massive sphere of water separated from the surrounding sea, its surface trembling. Then it expanded. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the sphere swelled to dozens of kilometers in diameter, swallowing even a portion of Whale Fall City behind Ethan. From the outside it looked like water, but everything inside had been stripped bare. There was not a single drop. The sea had been expelled by overwhelming force. Crackle. Splash. The world lurched. The merfolk king dropped to one knee, bracing with both hands. All across the battlefield, 100,000 sea clan warriors collapsed, their bodies hitting the exposed ground with dull, heavy thumps as the water vanished from beneath them. The power of the sea? Impossible. The Megalodon clan king rasped, his bravado shattered. Run! Run! He slapped his tail against the ground with enough force to shatter stone, desperate to retreat. But while he managed to stagger backward, the lesser warriors could not even stand. They rolled and writhed helplessly, their bodies overburdened by gravity without water to buoy them. Shark fin is delicious, a voice drawled, smoke curling into view, black tinged with crimson. I like it. The plume billowed into the Megalodon king's path, and out of it stepped Starfall, Ethan's father, calm and lethal. On the opposite side, Regis planted himself in front of the old Tortoise clan leader, blocking escape with quiet menace. Just as I thought, Ethan muttered, watching the chaos unfold. Without seawater, their power drops sharply. He looked back toward the merfolk king, who stared in disbelief. "Your Majesty, I assume this doesn't affect you too badly?" The king did not answer. He did not seem to hear. His eyes were locked on the 3 beams of swirling light twisting in the vacuum above, awe and terror mingling across his face. Did the sea god intervene?" he whispered. Chapter 657. When the sea stands still. Ethan looked up and immediately recognized the towering figures in the sky. The dragon child, the dragon of consumption, and the fortune dragon circling above like 3 shimmering omens. The sprawling vacuum beneath them, a dry basin dozens of miles wide, was mostly the dragon child's doing, although it clearly needed the dragon of consumption's power to hold the sea at bay. The little golden one, for all its glitter, mostly hovered in encouragement. "Your Majesty, we should move," Ethan called, already leaning forward. As he spoke, he shot across the churned earth like an arrow released from a bow. "Ah yes, Joran," the merfolk king barked. At his command, a dozen merfolk warriors broke off from the main force. As they left the water, their shimmering tails split and folded, reshaping into legs in a blur of scales and muscle. Ethan watched with grim satisfaction. Just as he suspected, merfolk could fight perfectly well on land when they needed to. He turned away from the king and the warriors, his attention locking onto a single figure thrashing in the distance. The Marlin mutant, the very creature that had ambushed him before. Unlike the other warriors, the Marlin mutant had not shifted into a half-human form. It writhed helplessly on the cracked mud, trying to fling itself toward a distant puddle. On the open sea it had been a blur of speed, but here its strongest attribute had been stripped away. "Don't you dare run," Ethan growled, closing the distance. "I am eating Marlin sashimi rice tonight." Without water bogging him down, Ethan moved like he was born on this battlefield. He cut the creature off effortlessly. Heavy strike. He wasted no breath, his body swelling with the familiar pulse of bare form. His paw came down with crushing weight. Regis had warned him that this creature was apex state, maybe even mid-stage, something a war god would struggle with. Under normal circumstances, Ethan would have needed every ounce of his power. But today was different. Stranded on land, the Marlin mutant was nothing more than a stranded assassin, built for piercing strikes and sudden acceleration, none of which mattered now that it could barely crawl. Apex state meant nothing if you could not use it. His paw landed with a thundering smack. The mutant's body bounced off the ground like a startled frog, slamming back down with a wet, ugly slap. The earth caved beneath it, forming a shallow crater. The mutant's small, needle-sharp eyes flicked up with hatred. It squirmed violently, then launched itself in another direction, desperate to reach even the smallest pool of water, desperate to regain its element. But Ethan shadowed it step for step. Boom, boom, boom. His fists came down in a steady rhythm, driving the creature back every time it tried to flee. After several blows, he finally stopped, shaking out his hand with a hiss of pain. "That stings," he muttered, glancing at the raw scrapes forming across his knuckles. Even crippled like this, the Marlin mutant's hide was brutally tough. Depth-born creatures were conditioned by pressures that would crush any land creature. Crab soldiers, shrimp soldiers, fish beasts, all of them were wrapped in armor thicker than bone. Above him, a strained voice suddenly rang out, vibrational and thin. "Ethan, hurry! I cannot maintain this much longer." He froze for half a second, startled by the urgency. He knew the dragon child's ability to hold back the sea had limits, but he did not expect them to reach it this quickly. Barely a minute had passed. That cry sent a ripple of panic through the battlefield. The leaders of the 12 sea clans raised their heads, eyes glinting with sudden hope. If the ocean returned, everything changed. They would not be pinned and beaten like livestock. Their true strength lay in water. At that realization, a frustrated roar rolled across the cratered plain. These creatures possessed overwhelming power, but without legs they could barely defend themselves. Their rage was thick in the air, desperate and suffocating, as they writhed under the weight of land. And all eyes shifted to Ethan, the one person able to end this before the sea rushed back. "I don't believe this," Ethan muttered, his eyes narrowing. "My great-nephew, don't worry about me," the Merfolk King shouted over the chaos. "Just make sure that one doesn't get away." He was locked in combat with a massive lobster and had already brought it to its knees in under a minute. Not far off, Regis and Starfall were struggling against 2 of the most fearsome leaders among the 12 sea clans. The Old Turtle King, whose defense was unmatched, and the Megalodon Clan King, whose strength was second to none. Starfall was clearly having a rough time. Even weakened and stranded on land, the Megalodon Clan King still met him blow for blow. Starfall had planned to end it quickly, but that plan had evaporated the moment he realized just how powerful the creature remained. Regis wasn't faring much better. The Old Turtle King had pulled its entire body into its shell, turning itself into an unbreakable fortress. To make matters worse, That shell somehow reflected Regis's sealing arts. Every time he tried to suppress it, the energy bounced right back at him, forcing him to withdraw. The thing was maddeningly clever too. Whenever Regis paused for even a heartbeat, it would poke out its limbs and scuttle away with surprising speed. Ethan glanced at the scene, annoyance flickering in his eyes. Whoever said turtles were slow? Among the 12 sea clans, the Sea Turtle clan had been the first to retreat, leaving only the stubborn old king behind. Ignoring the Merfolk king's warning, Ethan clenched his jaw and raised a hand. For distinct rays of light burst from his palm in rapid succession, streaking out in red, blue, green, and gold. He'd intended to capture the Marlin mutant alive, which was why he'd fought barehanded until now. But his arm throbbed, his knuckles burned, and frustration bubbled under his skin. Even so, he didn't lose sight of the plan, he just decided to get serious about it. The 4 lights were the 4 city lord seals, ancient treasures he had claimed back in the Sea of Death. Crush him, Ethan ordered through his soul sense, his voice cold and sharp. The seals responded like hammers in a forge. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact landed with perfect precision, slamming into the Marlin mutant's body. The creature screeched, twisting helplessly as it was boxed in from every direction. Kid, you're bullying this fish too much. The Marlin mutant howled in fury. Its every attempt to flee was blocked by one of the floating seals. On land, it could barely move. Its leaps were clumsy, its attacks useless. The seals weren't powerful enough to kill it outright, but every hit sent waves of pain through its scaled body. So what if I am? Ethan shot back, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The seals didn't need his constant control, their spirits guided them well enough on their own. With the Marlin pinned, Ethan turned his attention elsewhere. His gaze landed on the massive silhouette thrashing against Starfall in the distance. Sir Starfall, I'm coming to help, Ethan shouted, already propelling himself forward. Starfall blinked, momentarily thrown off. Sir Starfall? For a heartbeat, he forgot to move, staring blankly at his son in disbelief. He almost shouted back, I'm your father. Hey, snap out of it. Ethan yelled again as he passed by, seeing his father standing there, dazed. Before Starfall could respond, the ground quaked with a heavy boom from the other side of the battlefield. Ethan's soul sense registered a surge of energy. The small but mighty Merfolk king had just kicked through a giant crab, sending its enormous claws flying through the air. The creature collapsed instantly, unconscious before it even hit the ground. Great nephew, the Merfolk king called out, voice fierce and elated. Forget the others. Let's take down this megalodon together. His small frame blurred as he darted past Ethan, charging straight toward the Megalodon clan king where Starfall still fought to keep it contained. Chapter 658. Bullet of the Divine Sea. The Megalodon clan king was already trapped by Starfall, unable to break free no matter how fiercely it struggled. Although Starfall's war god rank was far below its own apex state, the human before it was unbelievably strange. Every punch he landed pressed down with the weight of a mountain, shaking the air itself with violent force. For the Megalodon clan king, whose movements were already restricted, the constant pressure was agonizing. What drove it to near madness was the fact that none of its own attacks connected. Starfall's body shifted erratically between solid and shadow, flickering like a ghost, his form momentarily tangible, then immediately melting into black mist. It was furious, yet completely unable to shake him off or escape this waterless vacuum. Now, with Ethan and the Merfolk king closing in fast, the Megalodon clan king felt its composure slipping. The Merfolk were creatures fully capable of moving and fighting outside the sea. They were essentially amphibious, and in this vacuum they were unaffected. Deep beneath the waves, its strength was comparable to the Merfolk king's, but here the difference was terrifying. Several of the other leaders among the 12 Sea Clan had already been knocked unconscious by the Merfolk king and dragged toward the city of the Whalefall, and once inside its walls, where the Merfolk king could draw upon his Merfolk pearl, he was practically a god. A few more were being cornered by Joran, and their allies showing obvious signs of defeat, their resistance growing weaker by the moment. This damned waterless zone, the Megalodon clan king seethed silently. He could not fathom why the power of the sea would manifest here. If they were inside the city of the Whalefall, it could accept that the Merfolk king might be responsible, but they were still kilometers away. The only one capable of wielding the power of the sea so freely was the Sea King himself. Looking up at the 3 ethereal streaks of light shimmering above, the Megalodon clan king felt desperation claw at its heart. Seeing the Merfolk king approaching, hatred twisted across its face, and grim resolve settled in its eyes. You all die now. Ethan saw the change in the creature's expression, and his heart lurched. Something was very wrong. Sir Starfall, watch out, he shouted. But his warning barely left his lips before the Megalodon's transformed fin, now like a human arm, flickered with a cold gleam. Two strange beams of energy erupted violently, one aimed at Starfall, the other at the Merfolk King. Starfall's perception was razor-sharp. Even without Ethan's alarm, he sensed danger instantly and dissolved into swirling black mist. A cold beam cut straight through where his chest had been. Sizzle, sizzle. The glowing beam collided with the black mist, producing a violent reaction, like boiling oil splashing into cold water, sparks of energy crackling and shrieking as it tore through the vapor, then shot onward into the distance before finally fading. Cough! Starfall's body solidified again, and he staggered, spitting out a mouthful of bright blood. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw the gaping, bowl-sized hole in Starfall's chest, a perfect opening clean through from front to back. Sir Starfall. Ethan's chest tightened painfully, as if a hand had wrapped around his heart. I am fine, stay alert. Starfall waved him off, his voice strained but steady as Ethan instinctively moved forward. Even as he spoke, the ragged wound at his chest writhed, flesh knitting itself together, sinew reforming and closing until his body was whole once more. The Merfolk King, meanwhile, was forced back repeatedly. His small form flickered like a mirage, yet the beam pursued him relentlessly, as if locked onto his very soul. At last, a shimmering blue shield appeared around him, intercepting the light. Screech! A weapon of the Divine Sea Temple. The Merfolk King muttered coldly, his voice echoing in the air. It seems your relationship with them is deeper than a mere alliance. You have submitted to them, have you not? Only then did Ethan notice the object clutched in the Megalodon clan king's hand, its shape unmistakable even in this strange battle. It was a pistol. A strangely shaped pistol gleamed in the Megalodon clan king's hand, its lines sleek and angular, all high-tech aesthetics and cold metal, nothing like anything forged on Earth, and certainly not of any human world origin. The beam it fired had been a concentrated lash of laser energy, compressed and precise enough to pierce Starfall's defenses. What kind of organization was this Divine Sea Temple the Merfolk King had mentioned, and what bargain had they struck, if any, with outsiders who wielded such weapons? Let me go or else, the Megalodon clan king said, raising the device as a threat. Starfall's eyebrow twitched. The strike had done real damage, although the wound was closing. The blow had burned away a significant portion of his necromantic energy and compromised his indestructible corpse body. Even the Merfolk King, proud and fearless, showed a flicker of hesitation, his gaze narrowing on the weapon with obvious apprehension. Or else you die? Ethan snarled, adrenaline and anger coiling through him. Today, I am going to eat your shark fin. You dared to kidnap my woman, you're going straight into the frying pan. For a moment the standoff looked like it might hold, the Megalodon clan king already backing away, calculating an escape while the Merfolk King hesitated. Then Ethan roared, and the sound cut clean through the tension. No! The Merfolk King cried, alarm flaring in his small features. Ethan! Starfall's shout came out sharp with shock. Ethan surged forward to cut the creature off, and the Megalodon clan king reacted without thought, leveling the pistol and sending another strange beam toward him. A figure moved faster than the eye, a blur of motion that stole the beam's path. Sir Starfall! Ethan gasped, his face collapsing into horror as he recognized the man who had thrown himself between the shot and Ethan. A thin beam struck Starfall's back, just to the right of his spine, making a soft, sickening sound as it passed through. The light traveled only a few inches before snuffing out. Ethan's breath left him in a choked sound, his mind already racing. That place, that spot, it meant. His face drained. He lunged to Starfall's side without a second thought. Tree form, he cried. Rejuvenation. Healing touch. Life bloom. Wild growth. Swift healing. Spells poured from him in a frantic, relentless torrent as if draining himself held no cost at all. Every art he knew hurled at his father's wound. Don't waste your energy. Listen to me? Starfall rasped, his voice weak but steady enough to stop Ethan's desperate flurry. The hole in his chest still oozed black-red blood, the spells sliding off the corrupt wound as if it spat them back. He kept coughing, each breath ragged, more blood pooling at his lips. He gripped Ethan's arm, stopping the boy's panic in a single, rough motion. Humph, you brought this upon yourself. The Megalodon clan king spat, abandoning any pretense of mercy as it turned to flee. Ethan's vision sharpened and hardened into a blade of pure fury. He hadn't heard the creature's words. He had only felt the insult like a blow to the back of his neck. You son of a bitch, you're going to die, he screamed and charged. Starfall, weakened beyond what he let on, could not hold him back, and Ethan's momentum dragged them both across the muddy seabed. For a heartbeat, Starfall's eyes softened with sorrow as he watched Ethan surge away, reckless and burning with righteous rage. You brat, you're the one who's going to die, Starfall muttered under his breath, the words half a warning, half a lament. The Megalodon clan king wheeled and fired once more. Another narrow beam cutting the air toward Ethan with lethal intent. Activate ion shield, Ethan shouted, slamming his wrist-mounted device. The device thrummed to life, a humming field blooming over Ethan like the faint shimmer of a summer heat haze, the ion shield snapping into place between him and the light. Chapter 659. The Fall of a King. Beep. Ion shield activated. A thin mesh of light burst from the device mounted on Ethan's wrist, unfolding into a half-circle of shimmering energy that locked into place like a compact, translucent buckler. He barely had time to brace when the attack came. Sizzle. The strange beam slammed into the ion shield, filling the air with a scorching hiss. The shield trembled violently against the impact, its glow flickering. Then the beam dispersed into nothing, leaving the light only slightly dimmer. Huh? The Megalodon clan king froze with open disbelief, its massive eyes widening. The force pushed Ethan back a step and sent a jolt through his arm, but relief washed through him all the same. High-tech against high-tech, that was the only explanation that made sense, and at least now he knew that the miniature ion shield integrated into his central control system could withstand the enemy's beam, even if not forever. "My great-nephew, you defend, I attack," came a sharp voice. The tiny merfolk king materialized on Ethan's shoulder like a darting illusion, his tone snapping Ethan's thoughts back into focus. The logic hit hard. Ethan's shield could hold for the moment, that much was true, but the foe's strength was absurd. He had not even pierced the defense of the Marlin mutant earlier, so how was he supposed to kill this monstrous Megalodon clan king now? Especially when ordinary strikes would do nothing. Even the Twilight War spear might fail. Thinking of Starfall, who had recklessly thrown himself in front of the beam for him earlier, Ethan felt a tight surge in his chest. Part of him wanted to shout at Starfall for being foolish, for risking his life without hesitation. But the words would not form, and worse, Ethan still could not understand why Starfall was so determined to protect him. "This shield will not hold for long. I can restrain him for 6 seconds. You must cooperate with me and finish him." Ethan's eyes narrowed with urgency. "Kill him?" The merfolk king hesitated for the briefest moment, his expression shifting. "I said he dies. Today he dies." Ethan's voice rose, the force of his conviction rippling through the air so fiercely that the small merfolk king tumbled from his shoulder. "Very well. At worst, we simply appoint a new Megalodon clan king." The merfolk king snapped back, making his decision without another pause. The exchange lasted barely a heartbeat. Before the merfolk king's reply even finished leaving his lips, Ethan had already initiated his transformation. He had never planned to rely entirely on anyone else. If ordinary attacks were useless, then he would use something extraordinary, a technique that ignored defense entirely. And he had exactly one. Panther form, transform, Ashaman's Fong. As the activation phrase left his mouth, Ethan shot forward like a launched projectile. Metal surged up across his upper body and face, forming sleek, predatory plating that gave him the appearance of a steel-masked panther. His silhouette sharpened and his reflexes tightened as he flicked his arm and deflected 2 more incoming beams, sending sparks of light scattering in every direction. The merfolk king darted after the panicked Megalodon clan king, who was still awkwardly dragging itself along with no legs. Seeing Ethan's new form racing toward him, the king's instincts flared wildly, alarm twisting his expression. Ethan's speed in panther form was shocking. The Megalodon king had only managed to flop a few miserable kilometers away, but in the blink of an eye Ethan closed the distance, his body dropping low into a powerful sprint. Forbidden, frenzied onslaught. At 100 meters, Ethan's eyes burned blood red, and the half-armor materialized by the Twilight War spear shimmered with a dark, unsettling light. His body surged forward in a burst of speed so violent that the air shuddered around him. Whoosh! He became a streak of crimson, leaping to cut off the Megalodon clan king's escape. "Get away from me!" The Megalodon clan king roared, swinging its massive tail like a bladed whip. In that same instant, Ethan's body blurred, splitting into 8 identical afterimage shadows that circled the target. Time seemed to twist, the tail freezing mid-swing, and the Megalodon clan king's entire hulking form contorted and locked in a strained, unnatural pose, as though reality itself had caught him mid-motion and refused to let go. Swish, swish, swish. Ethan and 8 identical afterimages swung their arms in perfect unison, their fingertips wrapped in the Ashaman's Fong transformation of the Twilight War spear, each one gleaming with a cold metallic edge. All 9 slashed across the Megalodon clan king in the same heartbeat. Countless wounds split open at once. Blood sprayed into the swirling water and splattered across the muddy seabed. Slivers of pale shark flesh peeled away under Ethan's slicing strikes. The force of the technique was overwhelming, so intense that Ethan felt as if something else was steering his hands. his arms acting like savage razors without regard for his own control. The Merfolk King had followed close behind. Moments earlier he had flinched when he saw the Megalodon's massive tail whip toward Ethan. But when he realized the monstrous creature was frozen in place, he did not hesitate. Berserker state. He roared, and a violent red aura erupted around his tiny form. Weakness! He shouted again, and a layer of dull golden light clung to his body, stacking over the red glow like a shimmering second skin. Merfolk kick! Boom! His small body snapped forward faster than Ethan could track, his tiny foot slamming directly into the temple of the Megalodon clan king with a thunderous impact that seemed to shake the very water around them. A deep, violent roar followed immediately. Blat! Skull and flesh burst in an explosion of red and white, spraying outward like a gruesome firework. At that exact moment, the technique binding Ethan ended abruptly, snapping him back to himself. The Megalodon clan king collapsed to the ground, lifeless and limp. The king had fallen. Ethan blinked, dazed by the sudden stillness. For a creature so small, the Merfolk King's strength bordered on impossible, and only now did Ethan grasp how much power had been hiding inside that tiny frame. But as Ethan watched, the layered auras of red and gold peeled away from the Merfolk King, fading like dissipating mist. A wave of exhaustion rolled off him, so heavy that Ethan sensed it without needing to ask. Whatever those buffs were, their cost was brutal. I surrender. I am willing to re-accept the Merfolk's rule and contract. A voice cried suddenly. Then more echoed it, rising from all directions. The remaining leaders of the 12 sea clans, battered and cornered by the fighting, abandoned resistance in an instant, fear thick in their voices. Boom! The seawater surged back all at once, collapsing the artificial vacuum. The timing was exact, almost too perfect, and Ethan realized the dragon child could no longer maintain his spell. Sir Starfall. Ethan's head snapped toward the distance. Starfall stood swaying, his entire lower body drenched in blood. The seawater around him bloomed into dark red clouds, but somehow, impossibly, he remained upright. Ethan rushed forward and caught him before he toppled. Stop calling him Sir Starfall. He is your real father, Regis shouted as he sprinted over, his face pale as he took in the wound. Starfall's heart was gone, torn from his chest. Such an injury meant instant death for anyone else. Only because Starfall trained the necromantic path in a corpse body did a sliver of life cling to him. But even then Regis could feel his aura burning away like the last ember of a candle. Boom! What? Regis's words hit Ethan like a lightning strike. His mind went blank, white noise ringing through him. Son! Starfall's voice trembled, thick with regret. You look so much like your mother. Do not grieve. I was the fool. I knew you could block that attack, so why did I interfere? Ah! He sighed, his voice thinning. Starfall's hand trembled as it rose, fingers brushing Ethan's head, his thumb gently rubbing through his hair, slow and comforting, warm despite everything. Ethan stared back, speechless, stunned, feeling that touch sink through his armor and straight into his heart. In that fleeting moment, he felt something from Starfall he had never felt before. Something buried, something real, something he had never known he needed until now. And then the warmth began to fade. Chapter 660. The day the souls went silent. Along the U.S. coastline, Shatterstar had activated its ion shield, escorting 2 massive flying dragon cruise liners. Blackie sped across the ocean surface, towing the 2 ships as they sliced through the waves. They could have gone faster, but the captain warned that pushing the speed any further might tear the ships apart. Even so, after only a few hours, they had already reached U.S. territorial waters. I wonder how the boss is doing, Victor said, staring out over the restless sea. The deck around him was quiet, the men restless and bored. Williams stood at the railing beside him, with Leo on the other side. You worry too much, Leo said. The 3 people with the boss are all monsters in their own right. He'll be fine. Yeah, Victor nodded, his eyes drifting toward the horizon. Come to think of it, the 3 of us were the first to follow Ethan, weren't we? His lips curved into a faint, bitter smile, the memory carrying both pride and pain. Williams tilted his head, his expression turning heavy, a trace of guilt shadowing his face. I couldn't help it, he muttered. And then I went and did something like that. If this were the military, I'd be standing before a court-martial, probably facing execution. His voice cracked, weighed down by regret. Williams, you messed up this time, Victor said quietly, resting a hand on his shoulder. But we get it. Leo nodded. Exactly. You know what the boss is like. He won't hold it against you. He gave a small grin and slung an arm around Williams's shoulders, trying to lighten the air. Boom. Just as laughter began to return to their faces, the entire world seemed to shudder. The calm, Bright sea erupted with violent motion as towering waves rose like living walls. The sky darkened in an instant, and the blazing sun turned a sickly purplish black, as though an eclipse had swallowed it whole. It all happened in less than a heartbeat, the ocean transforming into chaos, the air thick with dread. The smiles vanished from Victor, Leo, and Williams's faces. Their eyes widened as a 100-meter wave surged up from the side of the ship, rushing toward them with impossible force. If it hit, the liner would be torn apart and dragged into the deep. What the hell is happening? Move! Someone shouted, panic slicing through the confusion. Then, out of the storming sea, a massive shadow appeared. Blackie. The creature pulling their ships roared, and in that instant, a pale blue light exploded from its body. The water around it rippled like molten glass as it unleashed a surge of energy. An even greater wave formed, crashing forward to meet the incoming one. The collision shook the world. The two waves slammed together with a thunderous roar, sending water flying in all directions. The flying dragon heaved like a toy boat, tossed helplessly on the raging surface. Boom, boom, boom. The sky echoed with deep, rolling thunder, though no lightning could be seen. The sound wasn't coming from the clouds. It felt as if it was echoing from the very void above them. Each blast made the world itself tremble, as if the heavens were cracking open. Across the planet, natural disasters broke out one after another. No lives had yet been claimed, but everyone could feel it. If this continued, Earth would not survive. People everywhere looked up at the sky, their faces pale, their voices lost in fear and disbelief. A low hum filled the air as the space between heaven and earth seemed to vibrate. The world shuddered once more, and then, slowly, the sky and sea began to calm. It was over as quickly as it began. Around the world, people blinked in confusion, dazed as if waking from a nightmare. Some fell to their knees sobbing. Others stared blankly at the devastation around them. If not for the wreckage and the shattered earth, many would have thought it had all been a dream. Something's wrong. Rainy-chan is in trouble. The shout snapped everyone on the flying dragon back to life. Williams's head jerked toward the voice. It was his wife. She was standing near the cabin entrance, panic in her eyes. Rainy-chan and Williams's wife had been traveling with them ever since Ethan rescued them. It wasn't safe to send them back. Not when no one knew whether the dissenters still had agents lurking in the shadows. Keeping them close had seemed the safer choice. Now her terrified cry drew every eye. Quick! What's wrong with her? Williams shouted, rushing forward. Aunt Melinda was behind his wife, holding up a woman who stumbled out of the cabin. It was Rainy-chan. Evelyn, trained in the healing arts, was the first to rush over. Even before she reached Rainy-chan, a soft yellow glow flared at her fingertips. The light spread outward like mist, forming a hazy veil of energy that shot toward Rainy's body. But the moment it touched her, the light faltered. It wrapped gently around her body, then dissipated into thin air without sinking in. Evelyn's expression changed instantly. Ryan, she called, her voice sharp with alarm. Huh. Ryan was already on his way over, but the sudden panic in her tone made him stop mid-step. Don't me. Get over here now. I think her spirit and soul have left her body. Evelyn grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the unconscious woman. Ryan's laid-back demeanor vanished in an instant. He knelt beside Rainy-chan, his face tightening with focus. The others stepped back, watching anxiously as he formed a quick hand seal. A faint golden light flickered to life at his fingertip, growing brighter as he brought it to Rainy's forehead. The glow pulsed once. Boom! A powerful backlash burst out of nowhere, throwing Ryan 3 steps backward. He barely managed to keep his footing, his eyes wide with disbelief. Impossible! He muttered, the word escaping him over and over. What is it? Leo demanded, his voice tight. Her spirit and soul are completely gone, but that's not all. When I tried to probe her with my energy, something repelled me. There's a strange force protecting her. There's no way she's just an ordinary person. Ryan's voice shook with shock. The deck went silent. Her spirit and soul are gone? Doesn't that mean she's dead? Victor asked, his face pale. She's not dead, Evelyn said quickly, pressing her fingers against Rainy's wrist. Her pulse is normal, strong even, but my energy can't enter her body. It's like something is keeping us out. Everyone stared, speechless. A body with a pulse, but no soul? It defied everything they knew. Ryan, is there anything you can do? Evelyn asked, her voice low but urgent. Ryan hesitated, then slowly shook his head. Leo stepped closer, frowning. What the hell happened? Was she just scared? Williams's wife, pale and trembling, spoke up. No, she was asleep. Then, when the sky went dark, she started shaking all over, like she was having a seizure. Aunt Melinda and I tried to wake her, but she wouldn't respond. And then, she just went still. The group exchanged uneasy looks. None of them knew what to say. The storm had passed, but something far worse was clearly at play. Ascension Isle. In a silent chamber deep within the island, Alaric sat cross-legged in meditation. When the earlier disturbance shook the heavens, his eyes snapped open, a flicker of shock breaking his composure. For a brief moment, his mind reached outward, sensing the residual energy. Did something just pierce the Ascension Isle's barrier array? He extended his senses again, but the space around him was calm. Nothing seemed out of place. After a moment's pause, he turned his gaze toward another part of the island. Through the stone wall, he could see the faint outline of a woman resting on a bed, Amber Zane. Her breathing was steady, slow, almost peaceful. But Alaric didn't notice the color of her face, drained of life, or the bluish tint of her lips. Her condition mirrored Rainy Chen's exactly. Outside, the world had already returned to normal. The sea was calm again, the skies bright and quiet. Alaric lingered for a moment, frowning slightly, then closed his eyes and sank back into meditation, unaware that something far greater had just begun to unfold. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.